Historical novels gone wrong. That is my topic for today. When you read a book, whether it's only about a historical period or whether it's about actual historical characters, where for whatever reason what's depicted didn't actually happen, whether that's, I guess, messing up or choosing to not follow the exact details of what a period was like, or diverting from what an actual historical person did. Like it contradicts the historical record about that person. And I found this, like, where you'll read novels and these works that are made up things, oftentimes going inside the heads of historical figures. And you find out, no, they did not do that. That this was made up. The novelist, for whatever reason, we'll get into that, decided to divert from the historical record and tell their own story, and tell their own story. This has come up for me because I'm reading at the moment Joyce Carol Oates' novel about Norma Jean Baker, Marilyn Monroe, called Blonde, which is also turned into a Netflix movie, which definitely riled some people up in the movie world, probably more so than in the book world, because of perhaps not a too flattering picture of Norma Jean Baker. I don't know about the movie. I have not read it yet. I actually picked this up because of a recommendation from a booktuber saying, like, oh, if you're looking for a place to start on Joyce Carol Oates, this isn't a bad place to start, even though it's such a long book. And indeed, I'm about 80% of the way through, and it is a really good read. I'm having no trouble making my way through it in my slow, snail-like fashion. It is really, I'm finding it really interesting to read, and it's bringing up a lot of issues for me in this book that's gotten me thinking about historical novels, and historical novels that are purposely, Oates herself has kind of states that, like, this is a fictional Norma Jean Baker that I've put here. And yeah, in this book there is a very important throuple that she is in with the sons of some Hollywood greats. Has gets pregnant and has an abortion, none of which actually has happens in the real life of Norma Jean Baker. This is all stuff that is imagined by Norma Jean Baker. There's a rape in there that is not a documented sexual assault that happened to Norma Jean Baker. This is all stuff that Oates has decided to put into this book for her own purposes. But this isn't a review of that book at the moment. This is just this whole thing of, okay, we're you're a super talented, competent, not lazy novelist, who has decided artistically not to has decided, yes, I want to use a historical period and historical character, but that I do not feel constrained by making everything fit the historical record, to maintain an illusion that this is the actual life of Norma Jean Baker. And why do this? I think you when you get down to it, there's a lot of the readers, or if you're watching the movie of something, there is this sort of impetus of wanting to use fiction as another way of learning fact. I think I find that myself. You'll, especially, like, for me, I think it's like mysteries. I'd be like, oh, I can read a mystery that's set in a different era, and I can learn about the era, but through fiction. It's like, sort of, I enjoy fiction. It goes down a lot easier. It's maybe a lot less rigorous. There's a lot of, like, things that would be boring to learn about, like, how does someone live? How does someone get up in the morning? What does a house look like in, like, the Victorian era? What was it like to be a woman in the 40s, 50s, 60s? As a Hollywood starlet, and it's like, oh, okay, this is an easy way for me to learn that without kind of reading a nonfiction, maybe drier book about that, with that has got the story in it, the storytelling. And I think people use nonfiction that way, use not nonfiction, they use historical novels that way as, this is a kind of educative thing. So that when you find a novelist like someone like Oates who says, no, that's not what I'm going to do here. I'm going to fuck with you. There's going to be lots of things that are different. She indicates this also, that while Norma Jean Baker is Marilyn Monroe in this book, she uses other techniques of she'll call the producers, some of the rapist producers, by initials, or she married Joe DiMaggio, she married Arthur Miller, Marilyn Monroe did, Norma Jean Baker did. She married these fellows, but she calls them the playwright and the ex-athlete. It's as ways of sort of saying, yes, it is this person, but it's not this person in another sense. She's using all of this stuff to kind of distancing you from it. Though you do think about the stuff of like the thruple. It's like, did this thruple happen? I've spent a lot of this book doing the Wikipedia reading of it, where it's like, oh, I wonder if that happens. Like, no, that didn't happen. It's like, oh, this did happen. So there's that mix, that sort of unsettling mix of stuff, and making you question sort of what it is used for. So, like, why does a novelist do this? I think, especially someone like Marilyn Monroe, or I think of Mozart and Salieri and Amadeus, Peter Schaeffer's play Amadeus that got turned into the movie, which is how I'm probably more familiar with it, which is completely fictionalized. Salieri did not kill Mozart, but there seems to be this thing of, like in the case of Amadeus, it's like, this is the voice of God, and why has God chosen this cackling clown to be his voice of the voice of his God? It's curse God, Salieri, the fictional Salieri says to God. And it seems to be, it's like it's the author piggybacking on what the cultural symbolic thing of Mozart is music. He is one of these high points of music. So that gives that it's Peter Schaeffer hooking into that the figure as a symbol, and using Mozart and Salieri as symbols of something, to get across something and work, but not using it as, this is not a historical document. This is not how Mozart was actually like. He was much more complicated figure. But that's, to be honest, when I think of Mozart, because I'm an ignoramus, I think of cackling Tom Holtz in that movie, doing his ridiculous laugh and just being kind of like, oh, whatever, man, kind of party dude. That's what I think of him. So there is that. Now, there's also using a character and a time period in a historical novel to really do, we hear this about science fiction all the time. Science fiction isn't about the future. It's about talking about now through the lens of science fiction, at least a certain kind of science fiction. That is very much the case. And I think that is equally the case with historical fiction. Historical fiction isn't so much talking, there's a certain kind of historical fiction, at least, that isn't so much talking about ancient Rome as it's talking about our view of ancient Rome and projecting our issues, whether it's some kind of rise of a tyrannical figure, or the mob in Rome. It's like, that's talking about now. I think Rome got used for the British Empire a lot as well. And if you've seen British writers, there's very much doing analogies between the British Empire and Rome at that point in British history. So it's very much, and I think about someone like Shakespeare, who used ancient Rome with plays like Julius Caesar, Antony and Cleopatra, Titus Andronicus, not really, but those kind of plays, or his historical plays earlier back in Britain, had more to be talking about Elizabethan politics now and Elizabethan worries and concerns than it did about those past times. And as a result, Shakespeare was not interested in historical accuracy. You should not be getting your picture of these of Henry V or Richard III or all these other figures from time. You shouldn't be getting them from Shakespeare. That said, when you think of Richard III, most likely you are thinking about Shakespeare's hunchback, evil Machiavellian Richard III, which has its own propagandist and kind of there's reasons why Shakespeare did that maybe don't have to do with the actual historical figure. Sounds like it was a shit, but there's a lot of shits, a lot of shitty shits in English history. And then I think there's another one which is kind of goes back to symbol, is the idea of myth, of it's we kind of project ourselves into the world. We operate in the world on a mythic basis. Whether that's, I think that's most easily explicated in the idea of the myth of country. I think of stories that have been told, as a Canadian, have been told about John A. Macdonald, which is radically shifting at this point, is radically getting more complicated as we come to terms with how we have dealt with native peoples, especially, but and also native peoples. And boy, if you ask a French Canadian what they think of John A. Macdonald versus somebody in Ontario what they think of John A. Macdonald, you will get two very different stories that theoretically there should be. You think there's going to be a historical objective past, but there's no such thing as that. There are different points of views, and very much historical fiction is a part of that narrative of coming up with interpretations, viewpoints, kind of pushing agendas. And I think that those kind of myths, and that whether that is, and someone like Marilyn Monroe, I'm talking about Marilyn Monroe, the symbol of a certain kind of American female beauty, Americanness, female beauty in the world, is very much its own myth, and it's very much its own, has its own power, and it still has a certain kind of power today, going from Marilyn Monroe to TikTok hotties and stuff like that. I think there's not, they're not divorced from each other. There's stuff very much still there, and it's femininity, but it's also very much masculinity there as well, because it's sort of a very male. There's a part of it that is a very male creation of what a female should be, I guess a patriarchal creation of what a female should be, what the ideals, what is the place, just the tragic story that we tell ourselves about Marilyn Monroe and her early death, is a myth in itself. And I think very much what someone like Oates, I'll think about that by the time I get to the end of the book, is doing with this book, is saying there's the objective facts about Marilyn Monroe, Norma Jean Baker, but then there is a cultural mythic, a conversation that is happening in there, and a part of what she seems to be doing is trying to disrupt that, in her very own kind of Joyce Carol Oatesian way. As my first experience with Joyce Carol Oates, I get this very kind of dark gothic feel to her. So she is coming, that is definitely one of her slant coming to this work, violent, kind of trenchant kind of thing, but also a female artist recognizing a female artist. So it is all that, but it's like, so and that's one specific example, but it's like, there is this thing, I think I've hopefully sprinkled throughout here, this kind of danger of fictionalizing, obscuring, what actually happened. Like, telling, you can come up with myths. Sometimes myths are popular because they're comforting, because they support a very much of a status quo. John A. Macdonald is a lovable drunk who took Canada into Confederation and wasn't he great is a very comforting myth that I was probably I was told quite a bit as I kind of as I was educated as a young man, and that's very comforting. And but it's comforting to me as a white Canadian, settler Canadian in this country, and very much something to put down and ignore and marginalize other peoples, Native peoples, primarily in this country, or maybe and also people from French Canada in this country, from Métis in this country, which John A. Macdonald has a big has a troubled past with too. Just ask Louis Riel about that. But yeah, it's like it's this Joyce Carol Oates is definitely kind of saying like, don't come to this to learn about Marilyn Monroe, um, you know, and it's like perhaps it's there to kind of spark further interest in a historical figure in times, and that can be valuable. You can do your own investigations. This is very much a book that it's Wikipedia investigations for when you're just reading. I mean, I can also um, decide how much I want to go and pick up actual biographies about Marilyn Monroe. There's been enough written about her that I could easily do that. Um, I do think that there's some of the wildest, like I think I learned about Richard Francis Burton, the explorer, not the actor, one of the discoverers, as we now put in quotes, of the source of the Nile. I got really interested in his life, because he came up in a science fiction story where obviously he was a very fictionalized Richard Francis Burton. But from that, I went on and read a lot about him, learned a lot about him. Uh, Read a biography just a little while ago where it was like, oh, I can see why this might be a figure that we're not going to see too much more of, because he was such a colonial hero, even though he was an outsider and somebody who was deeply not fitting in that particular colonial system, but yet was also used as sort of one of these great dashing figures of colonialism. It's like, and that's that is that's a big problem nowadays. So I can see. So it'd been interesting if I had tried to read Joyce Carol Oates' Blonde pre-internet. I do think about that, of like, what if I didn't have the resources I do now, where I can just go, is that a thing? And then just kind of flip my magic phone open and read and learn as I go along about Blonde, about Norma Jean's life. How would that have been? It's definitely, it feels like a modern book where it's like, okay, you need to read this with a kind of a critical eye, which I think Joyce Carol Oates wants you to do. But I do also think about how many people, well, fuck, this is one of these things you get into prescription. It's like, oh, I'm smart enough to read this book and realize that stuff isn't true, but should I, but think of the dumb people. It's like, fuck, what an arrogant, assholish thing to think of. So what's the disquiet? The disquiet is it's going to fool me. And I know I'm immensely foolable. We're all immensely foolable. We're living in a big fishbowl. We're swimming in water we don't even know is there. So perhaps a book like this it's the bug as a feature, is possibly the case, that this is imagining, this is trying to project, this is trying to kind of imagine what's happening. Hilary Mantel has been quite rightly praised for her books on Thomas Cromwell, and a part of the reason why Thomas Cromwell, I think, was such a good figure to dive into as a novelist was because the documentation isn't there. We don't have a diary of Thomas Cromwell, the kind of the muscle behind Henry VIII and deinstitutionalization of the church and radical reforms of the time. We don't have a diary of him, so you can get a novelist, someone who was as brilliant and as great a writer as Hilary Mantel, to come in and do it. And Hilary Mantel made the choice, obviously, to make sure everything lined up. You know, Thomas Cromwell doesn't suddenly get into a throuple with Henry VIII and one of his queens. Anne Boleyn would have been my choice, but you know, she chooses. But still, even in that, the second you go into Thomas Cromwell's mind, the second you imagine his childhood, the second you imagine just anything of him internally thinking, you're making things up, and maybe. And so we're comfortable with that. So why not? Why am I not comfortable with thruples with Marilyn Monroe and Edward G. Robinson Jr. and Charlie Chaplin Jr. Those are the dudes. Why am I not comfortable with that? I don't know. It's a nice I'm gonna value that discomfort though, and that is obviously a part of the artistic effect, the very conscious artistic effect that Oates is going for. Whether I'm going to agree with it in the end, we'll see. I'm not all the way through, but it's just like this little thing is sort of like a separate thing from Marilyn Monroe. This is, historical novels. Have they gone wrong, or are they going right in a more noticeable way? All right. I will leave it there. I haven't come to any conclusions, have I? All right. You have a good day. More videos later.